Alright, so in today's video, I'll be talking about how Jacob was inserted into the Joseph narrative. This is building off of my previous video, which talked about multiple Elohists. If you haven't watched that video, be sure to check it out. And in that video, I talked about the layers of the Pentateuch. I've updated the graphics slightly in order to better match the colors and what I'm about to show you. So the Joseph narrative is composed primarily of Elohist 1 and Elohist 2. Elohist 2 is supplemental, meaning that it was building on top of Elohist 1. So Elohist 1 manipulates the oral tradition. It adds Joseph as a son of Israel, it adds Benjamin as a son of Israel, and it adds Judah as a son of Israel. The God of Elohist 1 is probably El. Like I said in my previous video, the original names of the gods were replaced by the word Elohim, so we don't have a whole lot to go on. Elohist 2 manipulates the Elohist 1's narrative. It combines the identities of Israel and Jacob. One particular phrase it uses is the sons of a certain man. The word certain there also means one, so the sons of one man. So he's trying to combine all of the sons of Israel and Jacob and beyond them into one father. And so Elohist 2 uses that phrase, sons of a certain man. He also time shifts Jacob. Time shifting is a propaganda technique where you shift something in the narrative in order to better align it with the author's agenda. And so it seems that Elohist 2 needs to time shift Jacob to a later date. And so he does this by making Jacob older. Elohist does time shift Israel a little bit as well in order to make him the father of Benjamin. But Elohist 2 is primarily the one that is trying to time shift Jacob to an older age. Elohist 2 also adds Reuben and Simeon as sons, and the God of Elohist 2 was probably El Shaddai. Alright, so we're starting in Genesis 37 here. We're going to start in verse 3. This is Elohist 1. Alright, so Elohist 1 uses the name Israel. Joseph has his dream. The second dream, I'm not sure if that is Elohist 1. That may be a later addition. Joseph's journey to see his brothers is pretty interesting. So Elohist 1 has him going to Shechem. And in verse 14, it says he was sent out of the Hebron Valley. The problem with that is that there is no Hebron Valley. However, there is a valley near Shechem. And in fact, it's called the Valley of Shechem. So I think Joseph was originally, in the narrative, sent out from the Valley of Shechem, and a later Yahwist, inserted Hebron in there because the Yahwist likes to move things south. Then once Joseph gets to Shechem, he's rerouted to Dothan. So I think this is Elohist 2's attempt to shift the location. And so what looks like a very long journey from Hebron to Shechem to Dothan was actually a short journey just out of the Valley of Shechem to Shechem. So Joseph's brothers take him and put him in an empty cistern or a pit. And Judah is emphasized here in the Elohist 1. And here is where Elohist 1 and Elohist 2 conflict. Many attribute this to the Yahwist as an independent source. I don't think that it is. It's too... Elohist 2 is obviously a supplemental source, not an independent source. And I think this is Elohist 2. What I think might have happened is that Elohist 2 tried to delete Elohist 1's account of the Ishmaelites, but a compiler adds that back end eventually, but doesn't want to delete Elohist 2's account either. So we really have two accounts of Joseph being taken away by merchants. Elohist 2 is inserting Reuben into the text and also inserts Jacob into the text. Alright, so that does it for chapter 37. I'm skipping chapter 38. That is the account of Judah and Tamar. I think that is a later addition, so I'm skipping that chapter. So we're just going to go to chapter 39. Alright, so in chapter 39, Joseph is sold to the Egyptian official. And then we have the section where it talks about Potiphar's wife and the false accusation against Joseph. This may be a Yahwistic addition, or it may be another Elohist. We could take these, there's just two sections where it mentions Yahweh, one at the top and one at the bottom. We could take those two sections out, and this middle portion here still holds together. In this section, it references Joseph as a Hebrew slave. I think one of the Yahwistic layers is trying to equate Hebrews with Israelites, even though they were originally two different peoples. All right, moving on to chapter 40. We still have some of the Yahwistic layer that makes Joseph into a prisoner instead of just a slave. They also seem to like to use King of Egypt instead of Pharaoh. So the cupbearer and the baker both have dreams. Again, Joseph is referenced as a Hebrew. All right, then in chapter 41, Pharaoh has his dream. Joseph again is mentioned as a young Hebrew. The Yahwistic layer is still trying to make him a prisoner. Elohim is frequently mentioned through the Joseph narrative. Chapter 39 was one of the few instances where Yahweh is actually mentioned. Yahweh won't be mentioned again until near the end of the Joseph narrative. So Joseph interprets a Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh puts him in charge of things. This is where the priestly source comes into play, although I'm not sure where that ends and where the where the Elohist ends and where the priestly begins. That is the gray area. The blue area is the bluish purple area is the priestly source. And then we're back to the Elohist 1. Joseph gets married, has Ephraim and Manasseh. And then we're into chapter 42, where it picks up with Elohist 2, which once again mentions Jacob. And then we come back to Elohist 1 and mentions Israel again. The brothers go to Egypt to get food. They run into Joseph. Elohist 2 has them insisting that they're all sons of one man. Again, sons of one man in Canaan. Elohist 2 mentions Reuben, and Elohist 2 also mentions Simeon. The brothers leave but find money in their sacks. Then we're back to Elohist 2 that once again mentions Jacob, and also mentions Simeon again. And then Reuben is going to try to offer his two sons as a pledge for Joseph, but this is an insertion by Elohist 2, because in Elohist 1 it's Judah that we'll see in the next chapter. It's Judah is the one that makes the pledge, and so Elohist 2 is going to have Jacob deny Reuben's pledge. All right, chapter 43, we are back to Elohist 1, who is mentioning Judah and is also mentioning Israel. Elohist 2 is time-shifting Jacob. Then we're back to Elohist 1, mentioning Judah and Israel. Elohist 2 has to say that they could have made the trip now because Jacob had denied Reuben's pledge, and so there was a time gap between Reuben's pledge and Judah's pledge. Then we're back to Elohist 1, mentioning Israel. And then verse 14, I think, is Elohist 2 that mentions El Shaddai. I think this is an insertion because it is it's kind of in contrast to this hopelessness statement here, and this is kind of a very hopeful statement that is made. And I think it's Elohist 2, or I think it's Elohist 2 instead of Elohist 1, because later in the Elohist 1 layer, we'll see that the God that is mentioned is El and not El Shaddai. So all of Joseph's brothers go to see Joseph again. Elohist 2 has to mention that Simeon is brought out. Elohist 2 also has to mention how old Jacob is. Then we have a later addition here mentioning the Hebrews again. Then Elohist 1 has Joseph frame Benjamin. And again, Elohist mentions Judah. And then we're back to Elohist 2, time-shifting Jacob, calling him a gray-haired old father. And then we're on to chapter 45. Once again, Elohist 2 is time-shifting Jacob. Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. And then once again, it shifts back to Elohist 2, who mentions Jacob. And then chapter 46 gets a little choppy. we have Elohist 1 mentioning Israel. Then we have Yahwistic layer, who mentions Beersheba and also Isaac. And then we're back to Elohist 1 mentioning Israel. Then Elohist 2 mentioning Jacob. And then Elohist 1 mentioning El. And so I think El is the god of El is the god of Elohist 1. Then we have Beersheba mentioned again. Then Elohist 1 with Israel, Elohist 2 with Jacob. Then I'm not certain where Elohist 1 ends and the priestly source begins. Then we're back to the Elohist 1 mentioning Israel and Judah. Then chapter 47. We have Elohist 1, and then it shifts to Elohist 2, who mentions Jacob, time shifting his age. Then we have this gray area here, which I think is priestly, but I'm not sure about that. And then we're back to Elohist 1, and then Elohist 2 again, mentioning Jacob. Then back to Elohist 1, mentioning Israel. Then we're on to chapter 48, with Elohist 2 mentioning Jacob, Elohist 1 mentioning Israel, Elohist 2 mentioning Jacob. And then we have a priestly addition here. Then Elohist 2 mentioning Reuben and Simeon. Then another priestly addition. Then back to Elohist 1 mentioning Israel. Then Elohist 2 mentioning Jacob. Then a Yahwist mentioning Abraham and Isaac. Back to Elohist 2 again. And then the same Yahwist mentioning Abraham and Isaac again. And then Elohist 1 mentioning Israel. Chapter 49 is a little messy right now. Ignore all that. I haven't quite figured that chapter out for the most part. Except here at the bottom. We're back to Elohist 1 where it has Israel dying. Then chapter 50. Joseph laments his father's death. Then we have a priestly source here. Then Elohist 2 mentioning Jacob. Then back to Elohist 1. We have Hittites mentioned here. I'm not sure that could be priestly, maybe Yahwist, I'm not sure. Then Elohist 1 all the way down until we get a priestly insertion there. And then we finish up with Elohist 1 and the death of Joseph. Alright, so that's it for today. I'll link to the my source attribution text in the description. I'll try to do that so you can look at the text yourself. That is still a work in progress, so there may be some notes on there that are still being thought through. But thanks for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe.